Perhaps you should ask him. That is the whole problem. I can't, Basin replied, and he was obviously very serious. Aha, I see. Basin was evidently aware that one of the goals of this expedition was to find a wife for Jinchi. He was trying to sound out one of the candidates, the relatively easy-to-read Li Shu. I think it is a rather complicated question, Maomao said after a length of time. Li Shu could be a timid crybaby, and she still seemed very young in many ways. But at the same time, one could say she still possessed her innocence. Not everyone was fond of someone who acted so childish, but Li Shu was a basically lovable person who might appeal to a man's protective impulse. You mean it? Why should you doubt me? Basin looked at her with his arms crossed. Maomao motioned him over and led him out of the hallway, hiding behind a rock in the garden. It was cold and she wanted to get this over with, because both Master Jinchi and my father hesitated when they heard that name. Hesitated about what? She was trying to play dumb. If it turned out he knew the rumors about Li Shu being the emperor's daughter, Maomao would try to talk around it. Basin began mumbling quickly. She is part of the Yu clan, and they have been throwing their weight around a bit too much for comfort lately. It wasn't quite enough reason to refuse her, but no, actually please don't just mutter to yourself, sir, Maomao said, conveniently ignoring her own habit. You won't tell anyone what I'm about to say. If that's the condition, I'd rather not hear it. You've heard this much already. Let me get it off my chest. He leaned over and whispered in her ear. They are talking about giving consort Li Shu away in marriage. Specifically to Master Jinchi. Goodness gracious. She had already known, so her show of surprise was superficial at best. It seemed to annoy Basin. Doesn't this bother you? Don't you think it's terrible? Ahem. I just figure I ought to be more worried about myself than someone else. Seeing as I am past my prime already. Now that you mention it, I suppose you are right. The fact that he agreed so readily perhaps explained why he did not seem to be very popular with the ladies. Jinchi and consort Li Shu were just the right ages for each other. Jinchi was 20 and Li Shu was 16. Jinchi looked a little older or perhaps more mature than he actually was, but they would still appear perfectly ordinary together. He had a quite significant claim to the throne, despite being Empress Jaikaiu's son. Li Shu would surely flourish better with Jinchi, who had no other wives yet, than she did amidst the brutal competition of the rear palace. In this situation, Li Shu might not end up becoming a mother of the nation, but she could at least be a prime minister's wife. She knew this would make her the enemy of many women, and a good number of men. However, she was important enough that they wouldn't be able to easily remove her from power. Powerful people often had to consider politics when they chose their spouses. For them, the free love advocated by Maomao's sister Perrin was simply a fantasy. Even considering the possibility of Li Shu being closely related to Jinchi, it would be all right. They came from different mothers after all. It wasn't ideal from a health perspective, but Basin probably didn't know that part of the situation. At the moment, Li Shu looked like the strongest candidate. Maomao stared fixedly at the man beside her. Basin, Jinchi's milk brother, must understand that as well as she did. And yet the idea seemed to bother him, deep down. Maomao thought she knew what it was. He was imagining her as a sister-in-law. Basin wanted to find out for himself if she was good enough for the beautiful and highly capable master he served. My father really did not look pleased about it, Basin said. It seemed that was what had gotten him started on this. Maomao thought that was understandable. After all, Gaoshan probably knew more about Jinchi's and Li Shu's births than Basin did. As for Jinchi himself, he could probably go either way regarding Li Shu. She was certainly pretty enough, and with a few more years she would presumably gain some maturity. She could not be called naturally gifted, but she did not seem likely to go out of her way to make his life difficult. All right, so her family relationships might be a little complicated, but what marriage did not bring some squabbles with the in-laws? She might have some sort of flaw, Basin said, practically champing at the bit. Maybe do not put it like that, Maomao privately advised him. If anyone heard him, he might get a good beating. If you are so concerned, why don't you go see her yourself? What? Of course, you have no acquaintance with her now. On this particular expedition, she wears a veil every time she appears in front of a man. She will open up as she gets to know you, at least a little. Indeed, Li Shu now sometimes talked when Suhari was present. She never spoke directly to Suhari, as she believed Suhari was a man, but it was still progress. Maomao was just glad Li Shu hadn't known Suhari during her time at the rear palace. They might have crossed paths once or twice, but nothing had stayed in Li Shu's memory. Was it you and your men who rode to the rescue of Lady Arju's carriage? The perfect excuse to call on her and to get a little closer to consort Li Shu while you're at it. Yes. Basin sounded rather half-hearted and wouldn't quite meet her eyes. I only worry. Well, she is a woman, aren't women afraid of the likes of me? What? Maomao simply did not know what he was getting at. He said this from the man who barely escaped my brothel with his virginity. Quiet about that, Basin exclaimed, blushing furiously at the thought of Perrin. Unfortunately, his shouting seemed to have attracted attention. They could hear footsteps coming toward them. Basin clapped a hand over Maomao's mouth. His grip was so strong that she almost groaned in pain. He's the one who shouted. She fumed, but she stayed quiet. Is someone there? A voice asked politely. It sounded like several people were coming closer. Maomao thought she could hear Basin's heart pounding next to her. He still hadn't let her go. He has strength if nothing else, she thought. She grimaced with discomfort and hoped he would let her go soon. It was hard to tell in the dark, but it looked like a group of 3 men. They stopped, and one of them came closer until he was only a boulder's distance away from Maomao and Basin. Maybe I was hearing things, the man said and turned to leave. Then, however, a familiar voice said, perhaps. But what in the world has become of Basin? Basin stifled a gasp. Now his heart was really racing. There was a cracking sound, a twig snapping. Oh, for Jinchi searching for Basin was there, and helping him were none other than the bespectacled Lahan and the 30-ish dandy Rikusen. Chapter 14, The Western Capital, Day 2. The next day Maomao found herself summoned by none other than Lahan. True, I did neglect to mention, the fox-eyed man with the tousled hair said as he sipped some tea. Rikusen sat beside him, a mild-mannered man. They were in a bower at the mansion. A nearby oasis made the place breezy and cool. The entire house seemed built to maximize opportunities to cool off. He was ordered to come here for a number of reasons. There are, I guess you could say, business matters to attend to. Everyone had their talents, Maomao supposed, and Lahan could be expected to come running any time hard numbers were involved. As for why Rikusen was with him, my superior does not want to leave the capital, so I have come in his place. Maomao observed. He sounds like a most useless superior, sir, I must say. I do appreciate your frankness, Maomao, but I think a modicum of discretion is in order right now. It was one of those rare things, a serious-minded comment from Lahan. Maomao understood that perfectly well. That is why she had been careful to adopt a polite tone. It had been late after her encounter with Basin and then Jinchi, so Maomao had gone straight to bed. Apparently everyone else had stayed up, and the results had not been pretty. It all sounded like it had been a lot of trouble, though Maomao had done her best to ignore it. She still had red marks where Basin had grabbed her. Her main interest at the moment was getting rid of them. Speaking of Jinchi and Basin, they had a meeting this afternoon. All of this talk about conducting politics over dinner and constantly trying to sound each other out seemed like a massive headache to Maomao. It would be bad enough dealing with Jaikuan, who now had an empress for a daughter. Adding outlanders to the mix only made the thought more depressing. So what was it you wanted to talk to me about? Maomao asked. Yes, that. Lahan slid his spectacles up the bridge of his nose with his pointer finger. Then he took a piece of paper from the folds of his robe. It was a finely detailed wanted poster. The picture showed a woman who was still relatively young with graceful features. That alone did not make her very different from many women, but the poster also had a further description. It read, red eyes, white hair, pale skin. That narrowed down the possibilities quite a bit. Maomao could think of only one person who matched the description. The white lady, we went to see her together. Yes, we did, Lahan said. He then showed her a second piece of paper. Who is this? It was another wanted poster, this one showing a man. Unfortunately, an illustration never quite looked like the real thing. Maomao rarely bothered remembering the faces of people who did not interest her anyway. In short, she had no idea who the man was. Lahan lined up the wanted posters next to each other. Something stirred at the edges of Maomao's memory. She had a sense that she had seen the man somewhere before. Lahan said, "We found this man several days ago." Rikusen added, "That is right, I am sure of it. So Rikusen never forgets a face." He said modestly, "Perhaps that is my one skill." All right, so he still did not seem exactly suited to soldiering. But given that the eccentric strategist who served as Rikusen's boss could not distinguish one face from another, having someone with a talent like Rikusen's around could not hurt. That freak with his monocle had a talent for judging other people's uses that seemed almost superhuman. When exactly was this? About 2 days ago. I do not think he expected us to find him. He was posing as one of the porters bringing in cargo from the carriages. And what is more, the cargo in question belonged to a merchant from Sheo. Sheo is a country beyond the desert region to the west of Lee. It was located in a rather precarious place. To the south there were mountains, but on the other 3 sides it was surrounded by larger nations. As Maomao recalled, the 2 special emissaries who had visited the court the year before had come from Sheo. One of those emissaries had been supplying Fafa firearms to the Shi clan. Maomao's face darkened. That's a bad thing, right? Generally speaking, I would say so. It meant that the same people who had been causing trouble in the capital were now showing up among the merchants from Sheo. And if they were connected to the White Lady, then it was very possible they were moving opium and involved with the bandits. Even Maomao, who wasn't very politically aware, could understand that if another nation was harboring people like that, it was a bad sign. Sheo likes to keep to itself. This meant that even if they were out to catch a criminal, they could not simply barge around. Normally, we would not be able to get our hands on him. Lahan continued. It was hard to imagine that someone who had come to an entirely separate nation was acting totally independently of his government, but we cannot say anything about it. That is the problem. Their testimony ultimately came from only a single soldier who allegedly had a good memory. No matter what Rikusen said, people could easily object that he was just one person. He could very well be mistaken about whom he had seen. Lahan could try to inform the capital, but even if they found the fastest horse in the world, it would take more than 10 days to deliver the message. It would take another 10 days to bring back any reply. All of this, apparently, was what had brought him to Maomao. "What are you getting at?" she asked. "I want you to be at the banquet." "That is why you have a room, isn't it? Right now, at this moment, you are a princess of the La clan." Maomao did not say anything, but her expression caused Lahan to knit his brow. "Ahem, please do not bare your fangs or teeth at me. Who knows who might be watching? Look, even Sir Rikusen is afraid of you. I haven't seen anything at all, sir and ma'am." Rikusen was looking studiously at the blue sky as if nothing were happening. Perhaps he was a better man than Maomao had given him credit for. In short, the business negotiations made this man too important to refuse. It did not matter whether or not he was a real merchant. But if he had more to him than what was obvious, there could be trouble. If he was truly what he seemed, might the White Lady be with him? And if so, could she have created some unknown poison using her alchemy? Or perhaps they might simply use narcotics. They may even have another plan in motion. There might be rare poisons involved. "Aren't you curious?" Lahan said. It was a dirty trick. "If he thought that would get Maomao to go along with him if we catch the man, you are free to investigate exactly what kind of poisons they are." This time she said nothing and her face remained neutral. "Of course, if you are not interested, then that's that." Maomao heaved a sigh and Lahan grinned openly. Yes, it was true, he had her. She hated agreeing for free though. She would receive an honorarium, of course, but she wondered if there wasn't something else she might ask for. Consort Lishu flashed through her mind. "So you can remember anyone you see once, is that right?" she asked, turning toward Rikusen. He finally brought his gaze down from the sky. "Yes, ma'am. It is not a very interesting talent, I must admit." "All right. Can you determine from people's faces whether they are related by blood? Can you tell if they are parent and child, for example?" "I suppose I could try," Rikusen said. Every child receives some physical features from their parents, and Maomao had thought perhaps Rikusen could see or sense those things. He said, however, it would be just my opinion. Without a very good reason, it could hardly be called proof of anything. Lahan interjected, "He's right," and Maomao gave him a dirty look. "Isn't there any way, then?" Lahan seemed to see a world that others didn't as well. She wished she could find a way to use his talent. Do you think any proof you discover would be accepted by others? He asked. Maomao had to agree with him. Without clear measurable criteria, there was no way to establish the truth of his judgments, even if he was correct. Children often receive distinguishing physical features from their parents, but they wouldn't be identical. These features would only suggest a possibility. If only there was some standard everyone could agree on. My sincere apologies that I can't be of more help, Rikusen said. Please think nothing of it. Forgive me if I'm overstepping myself, he added hesitantly, but perhaps you could come to Master Lacan's mansion sometimes. After a long beat, Maomao said, perhaps I could ask you never to mention that again. Her face twisted in disgust. This man Rikusen seemed like a perfectly decent human being. However, he didn't seem to understand what one could speak of and what one should not. My apologies, Rikusen said, ducking his head in a bow. I think I had better be getting back to work. Then he hustled out of the bower. Lahan looked at Maomao, his face not quite settling into any one expression. Have you no interest in coming? He asked. To that banquet of yours? You know what, forget it. With Rikusen gone, she began talking with less politeness. Oh, don't get all huffy. Is this stuff the Western merchant is dealing in something you want? So he was going to continue trying to bribe her. Of course she wanted it. Maomao went silent and Lahan looked at her closely. He seemed to be thinking about something. You know, come to think of it, he said after a moment. Yes, just because Maomao was angry didn't mean she couldn't be halfway polite. She took a sip of the tea the server had brought them. Last night you and Sir Basin is something going on. Maomao was mature enough not to simply spit out the tea, but it suddenly tasted very bitter. She swallowed it as quickly as she could. What did that have to do with this talk of parents and children? Master Basin is a virgin. I know, you do not have to say it. Good heavens, stop already. You do not have to blab a man's most embarrassing secrets to everyone you meet. He was right. It had been an impolite thing to say. Even if it was obvious to look at him, she could understand where a young man of his age might not want to announce such a fact. If he was really that embarrassed about it, she was sure her sister Perrin would be kind enough to teach him. Perrin liked a well-muscled man, why not indulge her? You aren't thinking of anything inappropriate, are you? Lahan smirked. I don't know what you mean. She certainly hadn't been imagining shoving Basin into Perrin's room. I'm sure you don't. He paused, taking a small breath, and then he said something unbelievable. He suggested that perhaps she would be interested in having the Emperor's younger brother father a child with her. For a moment, Maomao considered throwing the rest of her tea at him. However, they were guests in someone else's home, so she held back. She did not respond to his comment. She knew him well. He would like to try giving birth just for the experience, but he had no real interest in children. She, on the other hand, would be happy to raise the child of the Emperor's younger brother. She would do a good job of it. Meanwhile, you can do what you like, or perhaps not do what you dislike. I am not necessarily suggesting you formally become his wife. There only need to be a few slip-ups. You get to give birth and I get an heir. Everyone is happy. Then make one yourself, Maomao growled. I would, but for the life of me I simply cannot find the ideal partner. Lahan's ideal partner was probably just the female version of Jinchi, the one who would bring the nation to its knees. Women like that were not common. It is truly a waste that he is the Emperor's younger brother. Even with the scar on his cheek, no one is more handsome than he is. Why not cut off your most prized possession and receive a womb transplant? Did someone plant a seed in you? Are you able to do that? It was frightening how earnestly Lahan asked the question. When Maomao replied that no, you could not, he looked down at the ground, actually a little disappointed. So he was straightforward but evidently had no issue with sex changes. Maomao did not understand his standards. Perhaps achieving Jinchi's status was out of the question. However, if someone had Jinchi's child, the offspring might resemble him. Perhaps that was what Lahan was thinking. Maybe he hoped that with Maomao, who had such an average face, Jinchi's features would be more prominent. Now he was trying to come up with an excuse to make the liaison happen. An heir, truly. They both knew the child's fate if it was a girl. I promised to take care of it and raise it for my entire life, Lahan said. He meant to bring her up until he could make her his bride. He was certainly taking the long view, if nothing else. Maomao might have marked him as a paedophile at that moment, but perhaps it simply demonstrated the depth of his devotion to Jinchi's beauty. She did not doubt his faith that a woman who inherited even a fraction of Jinchi's looks would be among the most beautiful women who ever lived. She did not doubt that Lahan was completely hopeless and totally worthless. If anyone ever asked her if she knew any nice men, he was the one person she would never introduce to them. Ever. Anyway, give it a whirl, he said, looking at her with eyes full of hope. Maomao drank the last of her tea and left the bower, making sure to step on Lahan's toes as she went. When she got back to her room, a tailor was there. Had Lahan arranged for her arrival? He had some robes ready for her and he wanted to check the fit. The pattern and decorations were a bit different from what Maomao was used to. The skirt almost looked like it belonged on a Western dress. Now, miss, if you would be so kind as to change for me. The tailor, who was wearing bright red rouge, put her through a wide variety of outfits.